just takes a few seconds to going. Okay. All right. Cool. So looks like we should be good. So for whoever checks into this first, please let us know if we have sound as always. That is very helpful to all of us. And then I can hopefully make any adjustments if we need to. So this is a podcast that I'm doing with my mentor, Frank Portolese. It's a little bit of a different setup because we had to, I kind of had to figure out how to use Skype to get us like connected and that sort of thing, but it was also Frank's idea to go through this route. But in the past, I've hosted mental health events that Frank's been a part of, and he's always supported me with dealing with depression or anxiety while he's been at Elmhurst College and past it. And he's also supported me too, just for exploring this area of my life and that sort of thing, and supporting other people with it. So I have somehow convinced him to do this podcast with me. And then we're going to go ahead and hop right into it with our first topic. So we're going to be talking about depression and how that kind of impacts practicing in schoolwork. Did you want to start off, Frank, or do you want me to?
Well, I can start, and then, we can sort of, do this simultaneously, back and forth.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes. So it's my pleasure to participate once again with Amy's mental health awareness discussions. This is our first time doing it electronically. Of course, some of you know that I've relocated to South Florida, and I'm speaking to you from there today. And but it's been my experience that many of my former students, not only at Elmhurst, but everywhere else I've been involved, they keep in touch and let me know what's going on with their lives. Sometimes they foolishly think that I can offer them some sort of advice in various areas, and they reach out to me for that too, but I do that with my friends. So, it's something that I think is proper and appropriate for all of us to do. One of the themes I think that will come up during this hour, as I'm sure it has before, is that we need to stay connected to the people that are meaningful to us and to whom we have meaning in their lives as well. It's that is crucial, that we stay connected. In any case, the advice and the communication that I have with many of my students is not always strictly professional. Sometimes it veers towards the personal, and there are times when issues of depression have come up, where depression as a symptom of just their general life, but also how it affects what we're all trying to do in the creative world. And it seems like starting from about the age of 18 and going to about the age of 25, 26 or so, it seems to be a very critical time in the lives of many young people. If there are going to be issues, they can certainly happen at any age. They can happen when you're 6. They can happen when you're 76. But I do find that this is a particularly vulnerable age, 18, 19, 20, up until, you get a little bit past your mid-20s or so. I think there are a couple reasons for that. Certainly, you feel the pressures of added responsibilities. Many of us relocate away from home to either attend college or just take leave of where you grew up and relocate to another area for work or love, marriage. So there's there's practical outside reasons that these sudden changes in life and changes in general would cause a lot of stress. Things that were known are now unknown. Things that were predictable are now kind of hard to figure out. It's not always clear what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day, and so there's that. And then also I wonder, and you guys got to understand, I'm not a professional in this field at all. I'm just speaking strictly from my experience, and as a person who has felt concern for people that for whom I've been responsible, in terms of this aspect, music teaching aspect of their lives. But I wonder, veering away from that, my area of expertise and just sort of taking some wild guesses, I wonder if it's just not something that has to do with the age physiologically, in terms of brain development, in terms of physical development. You leave your childhood years and you much more closely resemble your adult self than you do your infant self, and when by the time you're 21, 22. And so another sort of speculative thing that I'll throw out there, not completely without evidence, is the more extreme aspects of mental illness. That is to say, bipolarism, schizophrenia, psychosis, very often starting in the late teens into the early 20s. It seems like there's, people are pretty asymptomatic before that. And, excuse me, and then around these years, if something, really serious, not to say that simple depression isn't serious, but something that's acutely serious and, quite obvious to all, is going to manifest itself in a young person, and often does, starting right around the very late teens and maybe for a few years after that. And, that's so for those reasons, it seems like, you've got kind of a two really good reasons to be concerned about people that in that age level who are not having an ideal time, an ideal experience with their lives at that point. People who are depressed, they always know it. They sleep too much, or they sleep too little, or there are mood swings, there are changes of mood. Sometimes there's extreme anxiety, there's panic attacks. These events are often triggered by events like big tests or big projects that are due. Could also be triggered by personalities. There might be other students, family members, professors, people like that who are coming down particularly hard on you. And the result is, since these things affect you emotionally, and emotions seem to be a function of brain chemistry, chronic depression, it would follow, must have some component of call it, an altered brain chemistry that's chronic and not for the better. I think I experienced it to a degree. I think I experienced depression to a degree when I was in college, and for maybe a few years after that. Again, those years from about age 20, 21 or so, through about 25 or 26. I just wanted to sleep all the time. Sometimes I felt extreme lethargy. It was very hard to get things done. I would, there were some rough years, and one of the things that I would do to sort of calm myself down is just remind myself that the way I was feeling was just chemistry. It was chemical in nature. There wasn't, I wasn't exhibiting anything physical. I wasn't like bruising or, falling down or anything like that. Inability to do anything, like walk or talk, but just a feeling of lethargy and of, I guess, lack of hope. And I think some things came around. And I think the cause of my issue was probably more environmental than physiological. Again, going back to those two, sort of balancing acts that from which depression can come, because some things started happening for me for the better. After those years, I got married. I started getting busy in my career. Some things started going my way, and I had reason to have hope. I had friends, good friends. I had people that were in the same, set of circumstances that I was in, and as a result, I had people that I could talk to who could understand my position, and people that I could listen to, and in the hope, in their hope that I, would understand their position. I learned that one of the things, I carry this forward now, but I learned that one of the things that makes a person a good friend is the desire to listen. If you can really, really listen and just hear people out, many times it's the best. It's the best feeling that people can have, even if it's sort of a temporary relief, to be able to sort of talk things out and have somebody, just hear them. I'm sure that Amy can speak to, feelings of isolationism, even in the midst of the actual knowledge that there are people that care about you. You still feel, isolated. You still feel alone. You still feel separate. And it's not that you do realize that people care. You do realize people are reaching out for the right reasons. They care about you. They're concerned about your situation. And yet there seems to be this bubble that's around you, and it's again just I think a symptom of the chemical imbalances, because there's nothing really there. There's nothing really to it. It's just a feeling. Just a feeling that we have. And in some cases, people grow out of it. But I think, again, it depends on whether, there's the causes of depression are primarily environmental because of the stresses of a temporary situation that you're in, like for graduate school, or you're, relocated to a new area, or you're in the military and you're deployed, and any of these things, it would be understandable that depression, it would be part of many things that you're dealing with at that point. But it could also be something that's more physiological and something that really does have to be addressed through therapy, perhaps through medication. There are many types of treatments now that are available that were not available 30 to 40 years ago. Around the mid 80s, there were a few breakthroughs in brain chemistry, in understanding the brain, brain anatomy, and then there were some corresponding around in those years. There were some corresponding breakthroughs in treatment options. There's EMDR now, which is a type of therapy that is based upon eye movement. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, guys, but it's something that is used with surprising effectiveness to help deal with traumatic events of the past that a patient may have had and has been unable to get past, has been unable to fully process, something called EMDR, eye movement, direction. I can't remember what it's called or what it means. But, and there's obviously been advances in medication. And just counseling has gotten better. It's also the structure of the counseling industry has gotten has become more improved. It's easier to get access. Most, if not all, colleges, offer it, and most, if not all, good insurance policies cover it as well. It's been recognized. Mental illness has been recognized as the malady that it is, and the treatments for it have been recognized with the effectiveness that they have. This has not always been the case. In my younger years, there was still quite a bit of stigma attached to mental illness, and the irony is that it wasn't any less rare. I think everybody was still struggling, and lots of people were dealing with, as many people were dealing with all these issues back then as now, but there was a stigma attached to it, and people tended to, try to tamp down their feelings and, just pull their way through life. And of course, well, in my opinion, that never works. It's always going to come out. It's going to come out somewhere. It's going to come out in your parenting, maybe years later. It's going to come out in your relationships with your parents as they age. You can't tap these things down. You have to deal with them. You have to confront them. And so this is my little opening volley in my thoughts about depression, and in this, in particular, in the age level of, I think, where most of our audience is this afternoon. Amy, what are your thoughts?
That was a lot. All of it was very, very good.
Thank you.
As always, to the people that have joined in, because I can see who's joined. If you want to at any point, feel free to always comment on it. I know everyone's always a little bit shy sometimes about commenting, but I like it when you guys do. It makes me happy. Back. I'll wait for it to load up though. All right. Sorry about that, everyone. We had some technical difficulties. Hopefully it stays good this time. if you're still with us, thank you. If you're not, I understand, I guess. I'm gonna write a note.
I guess this means that our entry into the podcast Hall of Fame is going to have to be tabled for now.
Yeah.
We get our technical issues
sorted out. I now feel for all the podcast and streamer people that I watch when they have to deal with this stuff. So I guess that was fate telling me that what I was saying was going to be really bad. And it promptly cut me off before I could say something that was about to be horrible. So where was I? Oh, Frank had just given a really good discussion, which hopefully everyone was able to catch. Yeah, hopefully everybody was able to catch that before things got weird, I suppose. Yeah, so I think I was talking about, for me, there's a flip between night and day with my therapist, at least seeing her again. So I guess it's like important to acknowledge too that even if you're dealing with, mental health related things, that's not who you are as a person, or that shouldn't be you. Because generally, I think even when I got really depressed earlier on in my college career, I was always aware that that wasn't really who I was as a person or who I wanted to be. As Frank was saying too, there's different ways you can go about it through like medication and therapy. The way my therapist always explained it as far as medications go, is like you still have to, if you're struggling with a mental illness, you still have to climb a mountain, but sometimes what the medication does for you is it takes away like the heavy rain that's going on or the storm that's cutting out your Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
So I mean, I always tell people that they should always just try. Like, it's better just to try something. Because if you don't try, then a change won't happen. Last year, I actually did some group therapy just because, again, I wanted to, or I just wanted to try it. And in that setting, it was interesting because I was able to talk with people that weren't as far as long or were like considering like therapy on their own for the first time or like medication. And again, my encouragement was, you might as well just try because you don't lose anything by trying something. If it doesn't work, then you don't have to do it again. If you end up not liking it. And then Frank kind of talked about too with how he talked about how there's different events that can like trigger things. For me, it's always been entwined with like performance, I think. So I tend to, especially back then when I wasn't able to deal with things as well, performances usually came away just as a negative experience automatically, regardless of how I may or may not have sounded or how well I did. It was always a negative experience. So for me, I had to work through a lot of that. And it's interesting too, because when I initially went to therapy, I didn't really do a lot of things that my therapist told me to do. Or when you're really depressed, it's hard. It's almost hard to do stuff that they suggest. So it's interesting because now I do all of those things. And I was reading through, for anyone that saw me post a bunch of like a giant paper stack on this group page of like mental health information that I was going through. I was kind of reading through it and reading through like negative thought processes. It was interesting because the way they suggested getting out of that or breaking that was kind of what I did in that regard. Even when you have like negative thoughts, there's a period I would say when I was a sophomore where in my head I was very focused on negative thoughts would just like come up out of nowhere, and in my head I had to like logically like go against them, or like say why that wasn't correct, and you just kind of do it over and over again until that becomes a much smaller part of you. And then I would say there's also, we kind of talked about like specific events kind of triggering things or not going well in life. Occasionally, every now and then, I've noticed even for myself. So So maybe this has to do with more of like the medication side of depression. Again, I'm not a professional by any means, and that's what Frank said too. I've noticed there's certain points where I will feel depressed or I'll feel really lonely, and it won't be for like any particular reason, and I won't exactly know why. It's not super extreme, but I'm just aware of like a general feeling, and normally it goes away after a little bit. I tend to find that it comes up on like really late nights, especially when I've been like stressed or like overworked for a while. um, Definitely comes into being. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Frank.
I I used to sleep like when I was in college. I used to sleep way too much, in these few years that I was going through this, and I would wake up and physically I felt better because I had all this sleep. Um, I don't recall the malaise getting any better or going away. Or at least if there was a respite from it, it wasn't for long. After a half hour or so, I'd find myself emotionally in the same place that I was in before. So I think the sleep was just a coping mechanism that didn't work particularly well, but it was, in many cases, the only option that you could, that your body would see, as viable. Um, did you do that? Did you sleep too much?
Yeah, I mean, it was the worst when I was a freshman, and I had a terrible schedule as a freshman. Like, there's a lot of things that just was bad about it. Um, yeah, so there was definitely a lot of that. Like, I remember being tired just all the time, which is a normal occurrence. Um, One, being tired all the time, sleeping all the time, but not actually feeling like you get rested at all. Um, I know the issue I had too was I was just on a really bad schedule, so I was like working night shifts too, and then I'd have like 8 a.m. theory the next day. So it's a little bit harder for me to comment about that because I think I was also just doing things that were like just physically bad for myself as well. Um,
May I ask you something?
yeah.
Amy started studying with me her second semester of school of freshman year, and then in through sophomore year. And what I would notice about and I mean that I will say, and I hope you don't mind my saying, but that freshman year you were struggling. It was clear to me that that you were struggling. However, I would say I would say that it did not really seem to affect your preparedness for lessons. I remember specifically thinking that you would come in, and I mean, we were at the beginning stages of, working with the guitar. But I remember thinking, during and after and between lessons, man, this girl's prepared, and I now I want to ask you if you felt that way. Because you were, from the standards that I set for you, and the expectations that I had for you were based upon the fact that we were just starting, and you were at a certain point in your development. You were you were not the player you are now. But my question to you would be that I always felt that you were very prepared. Did you feel that way?
That's a good question. I think it would depend. I know I kind of brought this up a little bit in the email that I sent to you.
Yeah.
At least as far as schoolwork and practicing goes. Again, mental illness affects people differently. I know people, for them, it affects them to the point where it's extremely difficult for them to get work done. Me and Frank, we communicated and talked about this a little bit in advance. At least for me, I always forced myself to get my work done. I think maybe in lessons, it was a mix of both. Sometimes I felt prepared for it because I was shedding it, or I'd shed certain things. Other times, I think I'd be more in a depressed phase where I would feel like I wasn't performing well enough, or I could have like done more maybe. So that's why I would say it's hard to remember too. So I guess it just kind of it kind of depends.
It's been a while, but you know, Amy, I have distinctive. I mean, I can think of other students, and of course, I won't name anybody, but I can think of other students who would come in maybe twice a semester, and just, you know, it would just be a lesson where we just sit there and talk. You know, I mean, nothing was going to happen that day. You know, the preparation wasn't there. There were, you know, all kinds of issues that were going on of various kinds, depending upon the individual. And you know, I don't think that ever happened with you. I could be wrong, but it's certainly not my impression, and it's not how I think about our relationship. You know, I mean, you were, you know, I didn't expect you to come in blazing like Pat Martino, you know, for, you know, after, you know, 3 or 4 lessons or something. But I do remember, you know, you always had a pretty clear understanding of the assignment, and to the extent that, you know, it was laid out for you, you always came in and did it. And so you're saying that for you, and this alludes to our, you know, preparatory emails before this, that you were able to just push through it. You were just able to just get it.
Yeah, done. I mean, there was negative aspects with that too. I think because like I would push myself to like do all my work. Just because again, if I didn't get it done, it was more of it would just add on to like the self-worth problem that I was always feeling. But at that point, especially my freshman year, I would say maybe even more so than depression, I had bigger issues just with self-harming, and other suicidal related things. So I think even though I was pushing through the work, I was definitely using self-harm to kind of deal with more of like the depressive side, and just as a way to like force myself to like keep going through all of that. So I don't know, I wouldn't say it was necessarily healthy, but I don't know, that was, at least for me, that was how I ended up just like pushing through everything.
Sometimes you need to just like think of one thing that you can do in the hopes that it'll make you feel better, you know, and you just do it. And even though you have these feelings of, you know, an overwhelming workload, and I'll never get all this done, and even if I do, it's not going to be done to my satisfaction or to anybody else's. You know, you just do something in a, you know, just so you can feel like you did something. I think that there are other, you know, people that suffer from depression that can't even do that. You know, they just can't get it together. And it's, you know, it's a particular set of symptoms, conditions, you know, the situation people are in. There are other people, I think, also that on the other spectrum that are depressed, would probably be diagnosed as clinically depressed, but you don't seem to notice it in them. You know, and maybe that's even more dangerous, because if there are suicidal thoughts and there is, you know, any kind of self-harming issues, if you're not presenting, you know, to the outside world, then that's a very dangerous position to be in, because chances are nobody's going to intervene.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's a spectrum. You know, I mean, everybody's. I think that's the first thing to take away from any of this, is that, you know, depression is it's a sliding scale, and you know, it's when you're on one end of it or on the other end of it, that doesn't mean that everything is falling apart or that everything is functional. You know, you could be at any point in it, and all of the variables inside of it are things that you're able to deal with varying degrees of, you know, being able to cope. You know, it's just it's as complicated as the mind itself. It's just as complex as, you know, as you can get, and it's bigger than any of us. So it's just so important to know that, you know, if you need help, you should know it and you should seek it out. And I think that what we can do is, if we see people that we feel are struggling, it's just so important for us to get involved and to just say, you know, look, here's a number. I think you should call this person and give it a try. Like you said, you know, if it doesn't work, you know, no harm done.
Yeah.
Try it.
You might as well just try it. I know for me too, like I didn't want anything to do with therapy. Just because prior to my college career, there's a lot of bad experiences with that sort of stuff that I won't go into. But I mean, the only reason that I got into it was just because I had a friend that was like very concerned, and of his own initiative, he went to the wellness center and like talked to them. So for me in the beginning, it was mandatory to go, but then I continued to afterwards. And then I had other friends or faculty that were also concerned. And at like different points during that time, like went to like the wellness center, like to ask about me or whatever, you know. And that was all very meaningful, I think, to me. So yeah, it's always important to, because a therapist will help you to deal with that, just in whatever way you need to. For me, it was just a lot of thought processes within myself. For someone else, it could be different. It could just be like being on a medication that will like help them solve like most of the problems. But having an actual trained professional can like assist you with that. And Frank has said this before, but I also say it too. And even my therapist, like if you have a good therapist, they'll tell you at like any point, and they'll bring it up, like if you're not feeling it or you don't think that it's working, that like you should try a different therapist, because there's different types of like psychology, and different ways that like therapists like will work with you, and like different like specialties that they have. And I remember that was one of the things like my therapist told me, which like took me off guard when she did. I was just like, what? But if you have done therapy, and you didn't think it worked, it's always okay to like look at like different therapists or try a different one, because again, they use different methods.
That's really difficult to do too, because at that point you are hurting. It's very hard to motivate yourself in many cases to do anything. And then you go, you actually like make an appointment with a therapist, and you know they can't see you for 3 weeks or something like that. And then finally you get in there and you realize it isn't right, and you realize you have to do it again, you know, and you may have to do this several times. You know, all therapists, I think, you know, they all have, you know, some of them practice for 15 years, some of them practice for 5 years, some of them practice for 25 years, and the longer is not necessarily the better. Some therapists have certain experiences that put together are particularly well suited for treating you, and many don't. Many are very good at what they do, but the realm of their expertise has never been such that when a person, a new person comes along, it might be better, you know, for this person to keep looking for the right, you know, for the right therapist. If I make a really stupid analogy, if you know, if I need a certain kind of piano player for a gig, you know, they aren't all the same, and the gigs aren't all the same. And what you're trying to do is put together the right combination of you, the piano player, and the gig. You're trying to place all three of those things, so that there's enough of an intersect where a good experience is going to result. And so I think that one of the more difficult aspects of this is that the first one you find might not be the right one yet, and you have to keep trying.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to move on into the kind of next section?
Sure.
Since we had that break in the middle, so we're kind of past the my 5 time, your 6 o'clock time.
I can hang around.
Cool. So the other thing that we kind of want to talk about, we've hit depression, more or less. Sometimes these always go in different directions than you think they will. And then I'll kind of start off the next part, and then you can hop in whenever you want. So another topic that Frank brought up is anxiety with performance. Again, this is going to relate a lot more to music majors and musicians, I think. I always feel bad for the non-music people that are in this group, but it's my life, so I'm sorry. So I guess with this, one, everyone feels anxiety with performances. I think it's just to differing degrees, and especially if you're thinking about it in terms of depression or dealing with mental illness, if that ties together for you like it does with me. I guess one of the big things that I've done, again, and I've talked to other people about this too, now that I'm more open with it, is for me, I've really worked just on my own self-image. So how I view myself, and again, I've mentioned this earlier, but working on like your head processes so that you're not in a negative like mental space all the time. So having like a more positive self-image, and again, like therapy can help that sort of thing, or going through that and going through with their suggestions. Yeah, and again, the big thing with that is that your performance shouldn't like equate to your self-worth. Meaning that if you have a bad performance, and everyone will have a bad performance when they get unhappy with something, that shouldn't affect how you value yourself. Like it's normal to like get mad or like upset or be like really ticked off. If you're like annoyed with yourself, I would say that's more normal. Like that's normal for me now. I just get really annoyed with myself. But if it's something where you get really depressed after and it starts becoming a self-worth thing, or you don't want to get out of bed for weeks, then there's more of a problem. So there's a couple things that I've done that have kind of helped to play into this. Again, one, the big thing is working on that self-image thing, but with that involves like going to more therapy stuff. But kind of the next thing after that is listening and playing with people that support you. So that can be like anything. And again, I would say this falls more through, like if you're dealing with depression and that sort of thing, this stuff is kind of harder to apply. So I would say it's more like after you've gone through therapy and stuff to where you could start doing this stuff. So like first off with the whole people thing is, one, trust your professors. Like if you're studying for lessons and like your professors are proud of you, you should really take that in and listen to them. But then also like your friends too. I know everyone's like played with their friends before, and they say that you sound good, and like maybe you like blow off that compliment or like don't really take it in. But I think it's important to take that in, and that hopefully that they really mean it, and that they want to play with you. So that's what I try to do. I try to make it so that the people that I want to play with the most, like my friends, like Vinny or TJ or anyone at the Elmhurst Music Building, like those are the people that like I want to play with, and whose opinions that I really value. And kind of the next step, I think, with reducing anxiety, for me was putting myself out there a little bit more. And then I'll kind of go into some different things with this. If you're in school, you have to go through a lot of jazz classes, which may or may not be stressful for you. But I know for me, one of the first turning points that I had was when I was taking the first jazz improv class, and I think for the first 2 weeks of it, I was getting like really depressed or anxious during it. But at that point, I was also doing more like self-reflecting. So I was being more aware of, I was just like, okay, why is this making me upset? Why am I getting upset about this? And in that setting, I'm in this room with all these other like musicians that are at a higher level than me, at the same level, at a level, whatever. Everyone's always in a different point of their learning journey. But for me, I was getting very stressed out because I guess I was afraid of like being judged, you know. So it was becoming more of like a negative experience. I think like after 2 weeks, to myself, I just got so annoyed to where just like with myself, like at home after like a class, I was just like, I was super unhappy about it. And like for the next class, I was just like, no, I'm not going to let this be like a negative experience for the whole year. I'm like, I don't want this to be a negative experience for the whole year. So I just decided like the next class, like whatever it was, I was just going to volunteer to go first. Like it didn't matter if I knew how to do it or if I didn't know how to do it. I was just going to do it and like see what happened. And I wasn't going to care what anyone else may or may not be doing or thinking in the rest of the room. So that was kind of the first time. And it did help. And you know, other people commented. I know Tom Garling was teaching the class at the time, but I just started like volunteering a lot. And I remember he made a comment during a class like after that or later on. He was just like, Amy's been volunteering to do everything. He's just like, it'd be nice if some of you other guys could volunteer to do stuff now. And after that, the whole class just started like jumping in if they weren't yet. And some of my friends in that class too, so they noticed that I was just like putting myself out there. So that's kind of like a smaller way to do it. So at least in your school stuff or ensembles, I think it's always important just to kind of put yourself out there, because it should always be a learning environment and you should be trying to make the most of it. I struggle in Gretsch a lot and the fusion music with that. But at the same time, I also ask Mike to let me solo on the hard tunes during rehearsal because I want to get better at them. And it sounds really bad, and I usually sound really bad in front of everyone else in that group. But I keep trying, and hopefully it gets better. Sometimes it backfires on me because then Mike won't let me not solo on it when we actually have to play it live, which is what is currently happening to me now. So hopefully I'll be able to work through that. So yeah, definitely it's good to put yourself out there in that aspect. And then I would say, do you want to add anything to that first, Frank? Before I continue on.
I'm jotting a few down as I'm listening to you speak. I'm struck by your experience in improv class, in Tom's improv class. And I imagine that most people, after a certain point, were aware that Amy is jumping in all the time, you know, in situations that nobody in the class probably was, really excited about jumping into, and just willing to put it out there. And I'm sure that many people thought of that as courage, thought of that as, being brave. And I suppose, you could say the same thing about, getting out there and going to the jam sessions or putting yourself on gigs with better players, that, that would take courage and that would take bravery. But what is courage? To some people, I'll speak personally on this. What some people think of as courageous behavior is just you saying to yourself, well, I'm already in hell. I'm already dead here. What difference does it make? So I may as well go for it. And these are people that are going to end up playing because, they can't help it. We always have the option of stopping this, if we're players and we're consumed by stage fright. One option that none of us want to admit is we don't have to do this. We can stop. We can drop out and we can try to find something else to do. And maybe you have heard more than once from professors. A lot of times professors, music teachers like to start their first lecture of their first class with saying, you shouldn't be doing this unless you have to do it, unless you have no other option, and you just have to do this. And but what some people call courage, or some people call bravery, or something like that, is just where you're standing in a position where all your bridges have been burned, and you still want to move forward. You still want to do it. So you just do it anyway, because you're not feeling the fear that other people who haven't come quite so far in that continuum, they still feel the fear, and there's a point where the fear kind of drops away. Well, what the heck? I'll just go and play this blues in D flat on the piano, and stink, but maybe I'll just play on the first bar. I'll just hold this D flat chord, and I'll just play that chord on the first bar, and then I'll wait 11 more bars, come around, hit it again, and I'll get through this. And after a while, Tom will let me sit down, It might just come to that, and if it does come to that, and if you're thinking that way, you're making it. You're making it. That's what it is. It isn't that triumphant point at the end of the movie where all of a sudden you're playing all these brilliant notes and everybody's clapping and shit. It's you deciding to do something to get through today. Just to get through that. I'm going to just hold this D flat chord here. And that's a lot of times what courage is like. I'll tell you my experience in improv class, because I'm on the other side of it, aren't I? I saw a room full of you guys, and sometimes there were 5 of you, and sometimes there were like 14. That was always way too. I think I had one year where there was like 14. That was way too big.
Yeah.
It should have been half that. For improv class. You just can't get through all the stuff. And, but, you'd sit there and you'd just listen to people, and they'd just be slaughtering themselves. It would sound awful. It would just sound terrible. And you felt bad for them. But there it was. And then you'd say, okay, well, what's one thing we can do, to make it sound a little less awful, a little less. It's still going to sound awful, but how can we sort of mitigate the awfulness a little bit, And what the experience is very few people just sailed through that class. Most people, there was always something somewhere along the line that stopped every one of them dead, even the best ones. And so, I don't know, maybe that's sort of a preparation for, getting out in real life. Maybe it's, stage fright or that sort of thing is something that you already sort of experience in that class, so that you, at least, I'm not saying you'll never experience it again, but at least you'll know what it, you'll know what it feels like. I remember my knees knocking. I've heard that expression before, where your knees shake. When you're really scared. Sometimes you see it in cartoons and stuff. You see the guy's knees shaking, I remember that actually happening to me on my first few gigs. I was so, just scared and everything. But I think, first of all, just be realistic. You're not going to sound any better than you are at your best. You're probably not going to play at your best. I play at my best 0.5% of the time. But the rest of the time, what I've been able to do is I have sort of a minimum that I usually don't go below. I can play certain gigs, and I can play any gig now, and I won't sound awful. You know, now I may not sound at all like I want to sound, but I won't sound terrible. Now I think that's what you have to work for as students. I think that's what you have to try to do, is have some sort of a minimum level of competence that you can always render. And for that, you have to know what the job is demanding of you. If you're in a band and the band knows these 20 tunes, okay, well then learn those 20 tunes. You know, learn them all. And so there has to be like a minimum. And then you may not sound the way you want to sound, and you may not sound particularly good on those 20 tunes, you know, if you're at a certain point in development. But you won't fall below the place where you don't even know the changes. And if you can develop your ability so that you have sort of a minimal amount of expertise that you don't fall below, then what you do is you work on building that up. It takes years. You know, it's my teacher Joe Daly used to look at me and kind of smirk, and he'd say, okay, so you want to be in the 20-year club, don't you? You know, and what he meant by that is it's going to take 20 years before I sound any good. And until then, I'm going to play for 18 years, 19 years, and go out there and put myself out there all the time and not sound any good. And you have to be willing to do that. So that's part of it, is just, don't worry about the fact that you're not going to sound any good, because you're probably not going to sound that great. But in the meantime, you've got to stop worrying about what other people think. One of the areas where things got a lot better for me, there was one point where everything got better for me instantly. There was one, thing that happened to me, and everything was better after that. And I'll tell you what it was. I stopped thinking about the presence of the audience. I realized that when I was practicing in my room by myself. Maybe the dog can hear you, that's about it. And nobody, there was no audience or anything like that. And once I realized that I had no idea what the audience was thinking, and, whether they liked me or whether they didn't like me, most of the time they're just indifferent. And I didn't realize that. And once all of that wrapped up, I said, well, why do I let them into my little game here? So after that day, when I perform, I don't think about the audience at all. I don't even look at them, Amy. I don't even look at them. If they clap, all right, at the end of the solo, I'll kind of wave them off, yeah. I mean, I try not to be dismissive. I try to, acknowledge it at least, but I have to admit, it's kind of a minimum amount of, engagement.
Yeah.
Because as jazz musicians, we don't entertain. We're not like smiling and slapping hands with the audience and fist bumping everybody and grinning. As jazz musicians, we're not entertaining. If you play a wedding, yeah, you're entertaining. I mean, that's what the singers do. They're jumping out on the dance floor and mixing it up with the girls and everything. That's what they're doing, because it's all about entertaining. But not jazz. Not jazz. Jazz is art. And you're supposed to do something that ennobles the experience of the listener. You're supposed to change the listener. You're supposed to make the listener go out of that experience and not think the same way ever again. That's what you're supposed to do. Now that ain't going to happen every time either. But that does set the I would say the standards for the boundaries. Let's put it that way: the boundaries between your responsibilities and the audience's responsibilities. Your responsibility is to the craft and to the music, you know? So I learned to keep my mind on the stage, literally keep it like a cone of, perception coming out of my head that stops on the stage. And I just think about, okay, what's the drummer doing? What am I doing? What am I doing against that? What chords is the piano player playing? All those, the usual stuff. And I keep it right at that point. I don't break from that. And then when the set's over, I do. So that's one thing about. I know that this is not a mental health issue, but if you are functioning as a performer, and whether you're above your depth or not, whether it's whether you're in over your head or not, if you sort of don't put undue awareness of your audience into the mix of what you're going through when you're performing, it's probably going to work to your advantage. This even works the other way. If you get it going and people are like yelling and hooray and all that stuff, I don't really engage with that either. In fact, maybe even less. I just try to focus on what I'm doing. I don't want anybody to pull my attention off what I'm doing. So learn to focus. Learn how your brain works. I may have mentioned this to you, Amy. When I was in my early 20s, I got involved in transcendental meditation. I took the courses, and practiced that for a while. And I will say that that did work to my benefit, because I learned a lot about the nature of focus and concentration, and how to remove the clutter of all of this verbal thought that you've always got going on in your head, and how to, there's a process that you can use, that mitigates that and eliminates it entirely in people that are really good at it. And I found that it was just a very good tool to use in focus, just generally. And so what I use that tool for is focusing on the music, on the bandstand, and taking my focus off of externals like an audience, bad sound, bad lights, yakking people, indifferent people. None of that affects me because I'm not paying attention to it. And that's also good in other aspects of your life outside of music. You learn to tune things out. It's an important skill to develop. Learn to tune things out and tune things in. Anybody asking any questions or commentary or anything like that?
So far, not yet. It depends. I've noticed most people are pretty shy in the live stream format.
That's why
they'll tell me the audio's good and like that's it.
Yeah, let's hope. That's why when I was at the school and I did my little presentation at 11:30 in the school, 11:45 now.
Oh yeah.
I asked them to write the questions down.
Yeah.
Rather than say, hey, any questions? Nobody's going to ask any questions. They're going to put themselves out there. But everybody wrote down stuff.
Yeah.
And they were great questions, and the questions were so good that I felt like I had to afterwards address it, and I sent Mike the answers.
He taped them up in the hallway.
Yeah, because they were good questions, and that's what people want to do. They want to ask those things, but that's a lousy format to put it in. So I don't know. We got to figure out a way that people can text questions.
Well, I told them they could message them to me. Yeah. I don't think anyone did. It's fine though.
Can we start to think about wrapping this up?
Yeah. I feel like we're at a good ending or closing point. Yeah. I mean, the only other thing that I really have to add, at least with that, like Frank saying that you really have to want it, or things are going to be bad when you like put yourself into new performance situations, especially at the Chicago jams if you go to them or when you first start going. I know the first one I went to, I like completely trashed it. I was so anxious beforehand. Um, like the tune that I picked was one that I've always known, and it's like I love that tune. And literally within like the count off, like an overwhelming like wave of anxiety came over me, and I completely forgot what tune we were playing. So that was a disaster. But even when things like that happen, you get through it, and then you go back again because you still want to play. And fortunately, the environment that I was in was also very positive for the people that were there, and they were still supportive regardless. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I think that's the only thing that I really have to add on to it.
Don't expect everybody to be nice to you in the jam sessions.
Yeah, it's also true.
You know, oftentimes, everybody's dealing with their issues, and there are all kinds of issues, believe me. And they may not like you because you walk in and you're a woman, or you're white, or you're threatening in some other way. And sometimes people have had a couple of brews in them, and they'll lash out at you. You know, and you just got to learn to expect that. And the first thing you have to understand is that's not on you, man. That's on them. Who does that to people? Well, if you're the kind of person that thinks who does that to people, well, then you're not that kind of person. But for whatever reason, that person is, and chances are they're hurting. They're hurting in some kind of way, like we all are. And but their coping mechanism is to lash out, because that's what's worked for them in the past in whatever situation they're in. And you just kind of look at them and go, well, that's a drag. I hope you get it together, and you move on. But try not to take it personally, because sometimes it's not even that hard to avoid taking it personally, because it's just so overt, it's so unexpected, and so impolite, and but people will do it. So don't expect people to always be what you would hope that they are, and what you would hope that you would be for yourself. So that's one other thing, to just sort of a warning to throw out there.
Yeah. Go with your friends though too. I think it's always better if you go with your friends. I mean, my favorite thing to do is, for some departments they get competitive, depending on who's in them. But like, I love the guitar department at Elmhurst. Like, I love going to jam sessions with Cole, because Cole makes sure that I get to play, and Cole makes sure that I get to call tunes that I want to play, because we're buddies, and he's a more confident person, you know. And it's like, I love that. It's great. Or, I bring Vinny and TJ with me, and then we monopolize the rhythm section at a jam. And then I pick the tune that I want to play, because it's the rhythm section united against anyone else that might want to come up. So go with your friends. You don't have to like do it alone. So that's also my advice with dealing with uncomfortable circumstances.
Well, Amy, this has been really great. Thanks for asking me to do this. I enjoy it, and it's good to talk to you, and it's good to know that this is getting out to some of my former students and my old friends, and we'll do it again sometime if you'll have me.
Yes, for sure. I also always like hearing your thoughts and stuff. Very insightful. But yeah, we're gonna call it here. So yeah, thanks for joining us, guys. I will make an edited version of this most likely between both videos, and then share it all over the place. I You can say bye if you want, Frank. I'm going to end the live video part of it.
Okay, goodbye, everybody. Be
See ya.
well, and see you around.